Welcome to the Health King's Court. Ancient wisdom, modern health. The realest health podcast in the world. We're here to have the conversations you need to hear to live a healthier, more fulfilled life. Physical health, mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, and everything in between. We've been disconnected from reality, from nature, and from truth itself. And far too many people are suffering. But it doesn't have to be this way. On this show, we're shining light where it's darkest, exposing the lies fed to us by mainstream institutions, and finding truth as best we can. It's time to break the cycles of unhealthiness that have trapped society for far too long and set humanity free. Change happens from the ground up, starting with people just like me and just like you, healing our minds, our bodies, and our souls. There's plenty to talk about, so let's get to today's episode. Welcome to another episode of the Health King's Court. I'm your host, Zach the Health King. Today I have a very interesting guest with me, also from New Jersey. She is a licensed clinical social worker. She's the owner of a holistic therapy practice in northern New Jersey. And in her private practice, she counsels teens and works with them to give them the tools they need to navigate life, whatever that means. She takes a holistic approach to therapy, looking at the whole person, not just their symptoms. She's the author of Mental Health Uncensored, 10 Foundations Every Parent Needs to Know. It's a book designed to give parents steps on how to improve their child's mental health. Her second book is a workbook for teens called Mental Health Uncensored, 10 Foundations Every Teen Needs to Know. She's a speaker and writer who helps educate teens and parents on the topics they face in everyday life. She's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and continues to further her education by obtaining additional certifications in her field, a forever student. When she isn't busy working with teens, she's busy with her own 4 children and her flock of chickens, which I know will keep you busy, definitely. That is Keri Cooper. Keri, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for being here. You know, mental health is at the foundation of all matters of life itself, not just health, because, you know, their brain and the mind, whatever we want to kind of frame it as, is the driving force and the driving factor between or behind the physical health or anything else. So it's definitely super essential in an area that's of great interest for me. And being that you work with teens who are the adults of tomorrow, you are quintessentially shaping the future in a way. And so it's super important to address children or teenagers at such a pivotal and confusing and daunting time that you know, essentially everyone that grows up to be an adult experiences. And so I guess begin,
you said it, confusing and daunting are good ways to describe that.
Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, it doesn't have to be such a negative connotation, right? The formative years of adolescence can definitely be beautiful. And unfortunately, I don't think that's experienced by a lot of people. But before we kind of dive into why that is, I'd love to get to know a bit about you and why is it that you got into this as your area of work, being mental health overall, and why is it that you decided to specialize in working with teens?
Absolutely. So I always, say it really came from my own teenage experience. I had a lot of friends who really struggled, and my gosh, I loved listening to them and talking to them. And I was like a therapist in training from high school. And I was always annoyed that there was no adult that they could really talk to without judgment. Like, I felt like everyone in our school system who you were supposed to talk to was just like judgy about it. And I was just annoyed about that. So I always kind of felt like I want to be that person that kids could talk to without judgment. And listen, their brains are not fully developed. They're going to do stupid things. So to be able to have a person who, instead of judging you, is really just helping guide you is amazing during that time period. And I wanted to be that person. So I decided, early on, I wanted to be a therapist. And I always said I wanted to work with really, adolescents. So that's what I did. I went on a very traditional path of college and graduate school and started off my career very traditionally trained. And, probably like 5 years into my career, I was like, what's not working here? Like the kids are getting better, but like not 100%. And there's like clinical teams working with them, like numerous therapists and group therapy and psychiatrists. And I'm like, what are we missing? And, it wasn't until years later that I realized that there is such a connection between food and behavior and food and mental health. So I really wanted to like dive into that, but they don't teach you that in school. So I had to go back to school and get certified as a health coach just so I could talk about food in my practice. And then when I started talking about that, it just started exploding. And I was like, wait a second, what about exercise? What about sleep? What about all these foundations that we need in order to have good mental health? So that's how I really became a more holistic psychotherapist. Instead of just being like, okay, what are your symptoms? Let's do our traditional therapy. I take it out and I'm like, okay, tell me what you're doing every single day. Tell me about your sleep. Tell me about your food. Tell me about your exercise. Like, what else is happening in your life? Because if you are laying in your bed, watching TikTok all day and never seeing the light of day and eating a bag of Doritos and a Red Bull, you're not going to feel good no matter what we're talking about in this office.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's how I really jumped into all of this.
Yeah. It's kind of like once you see, you can't unsee, right? You can't really pull yourself out of the rabbit hole. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It can be a very empowering thing once we uncover just how connected every bit of our bodies are. And it's so interesting when mental health professionals kind of try to compartmentalize, what are your thoughts, what are your feelings, and then just talk about that. Nothing in nature really exists in isolation. Everything exists as part of a whole and part of simultaneous systems of wholes at the same time. And so it's very, I think, immature, to put it nicely, to think that we can just address effectively mental health without considering all of the other things that are beautifully intertwined within the human experience. And so, in your experience working directly with these teens, what was that transformation like when you started implementing these holistic kind of questions and recommendations? Did you see a sharp increase in improvements in mental health? Was it a complete 180 for some people? Or was it kind of like a drip drab of like, okay, people are still steadily getting better only?
I really did see a huge difference. I saw kids who were like, oh, I get it. Like now I get it. I set up these daily habits and oh my gosh, I feel better. And great. And then they're on their merry way, which is wonderful. So it's not only a shift of like they feel better, but it's also a shift of empowerment that they realize that their daily choices impact how they feel, that they're just not a victim to their feelings. And so many of them walk into my office just feeling like a victim to their feelings and like kind of throwing their hands up and being like, well, that's my feelings. That's how I feel. And it's like, no, you can actually start to control them. You can actually feel better. And so once they realize they can do that, it's really empowering and that will last with them for life.
And how do you find is the reception to these recommendations when you're making them, right? So, children or teenagers are interesting in that they are kind of malleable in the mind, and ideally they should be open-minded, but also they have a lot of noise that they're exposed to, this, that, the other. So they're always receiving a lot of input of different ideas, and they could talk to you and then go on social media and be receiving conflicting things. Like, do you find teens to be receptive to these lifestyle changes upon being exposed to them, and all it really takes is that exposure? Or does it kind of take more of a, I don't want to say convincing, but more of a kind of sell to them,
Right. Every kid's really different. Some will hop right on board and others are like, no, I'm not getting off my, 8 hours a day of TikTok or, no, I'm not fixing my sleeping habits or eating better. And, normally it's like eventually they just feel bad enough where it's like, let's just try something different. Like what we're doing isn't working. Let's just try one thing different. And it's once they try it and once they see the results, then they're like, oh, I get it now. And then they get kind of plugged back in and they're like, okay, I could do this.
Yeah.
But sometimes it feels so foreign to them to be like, what do you mean? Like I could just control my feelings if I, start exercising or sleep better. Like they don't get that it's all connected. Because
Yeah.
again, as a society as well, like we've compartmentalized everything. And it's like, oh, well, here's your physical health and here's your mental health. And it's like, they're so connected. You can't talk about one without the other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so you're a private practitioner, right? And so you have a private practice. You're also working in the school, or
No, I'm not in the schools.
private practice?
Back in the day, I was in schools, not in the schools anymore. No, I'm in private practice.
Got it. And so the people or teenagers that you're seeing, are they more so teens that have requested to attend therapy and then their parents figure it out and they find their way to you? Or is there some in there that their parents kind of send them to therapy and it wasn't really their choice? Do you get a mixture
I
of?
would say it's like half and half, to be honest. And, I definitely get those calls from the parents who are like, my kid needs therapy, but they're refusing. And what do I do? And I always say, have them meet with me just once. I'm not going to force anyone into therapy if it's not their time.
Yeah.
Have them meet with me once. And I will tell you 9 out of 10 times after I meet with them once, they'll come back to see me again.
Wow.
But that's because I've been doing this for 25 years and this is my population and this is what I get and this is what I love. And the kids also know that. Like they know the therapists, not to like beat up on therapists, but like they know the therapists who say, oh, I see, couples and adults and teens. And it's like, that's a lot of different populations. They're all so unique.
Yeah.
I don't see couples. I don't see adults in this world. Like I just see teens because teens have their own unique challenges. And because I only see teens, like I get it and they know I get it. Teens are not dumb.
Yeah, people have this concept that unless they're 18 and up, they're just, some sort of robot without a brain. But, people are people, no matter what age they are. And so I'm interested, what is your philosophy in those initial meetings that you think makes you so effective in having that return rate? Like what is it that you're exuding, or that is it something you're saying? Is it just a vibe? Like, well, how do you kind of approach those kind of closed off teens to, I don't want to use like a negative sounding term like hook them, but like how do you kind of grab their attention?
It's a good question. And I think it's a question with a lot of different answers. One I think is that right off the bat, I tell them like, listen, I know you don't want to be here. Like I respect that. And I'm asking you just to meet with me this one time. And if you don't want to, again, that's your choice and I'm not going to make you. So I think that as well, like letting them know, like, I get that there's resistance and I'm not going to force you to talk to me. And then normally it's just also like a vibe and an energy. And like I start where they want to start and we find ways of connecting. And that's kind of what brings it all up. And then, they will tell me what are they struggling with. And I'm like, all right, we could work on that type of stuff. Like it doesn't need to be like that.
Yeah.
So I think once they also see that there's some hope for change, they're more likely to engage.
Do you find you do more of the talking or more of the listening in kind of those preliminary meetings?
I think in the beginning, especially if they're more resistant, I definitely do more of the talking to try to connect and try to like tell them, also about me and what I do and what this looks like in here and to lay out the process.
Yeah. And so this might be a bit of a difficult question for yourself to answer, of course, because you generally work with the sample that you work with being teens that are being sent to or attending therapy by choice. But overall, what would you say is the average state of our teens' mental health in society?
It's a disaster.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, all of the studies are backing that up. When I started off my career 25 years ago, so it's been 25, lots happened in 25 years, especially in terms of social media and how teens relate to each other in terms of, electronics and stuff like that. So 25 years ago, what was coming in my office was ADHD, behavioral problems, some mood issues, some anxiety, some depression. What comes in my office now? 99% anxiety. I've never seen this type of anxiety in kids before. And that's what other therapists are saying. That's what studies are showing. I mean, that's what's happening in this world. It was getting bad before COVID. It was already getting bad. There was already a huge shift in just massively anxious children. COVID, whoever was hanging on by a thread was pushed over the ledge.
Yeah.
So then COVID, it just exploded and it really hasn't recovered, like slightly, but not much. So it's been a real challenge. And that's why I wrote the books when I did. I wrote my first book during COVID because I had an explosion of people trying to call me and get their kids in. I'm full. Every other therapist I know is full. And parents just needed a resource. They needed some type of guide to help in the moment. And that's why I wrote Mental Health Uncensored, 10 Foundations Every Parent Needs to Know, to get the information in hands so they could start using it.
Yeah. If the whole intended purpose of the lockdowns was to screw with people's minds, that would have been something that was very successful, right?
Yeah. You take a bunch of teenagers where their entire developmental stage is about leaving their family unit and being with friends and finding their own identity. And then you force them to stay home and don't see any of their friends. Yeah, you're going to really mess those people up.
Yeah.
They lost out on all the very typical developmental things. Their sports, their theater programs, they're going to proms, they're going out dating, like going out with friends, being kids. Like they lost so much of it. Yeah. And that whole time during COVID, people kept on saying, like, kids are so resilient. No, they're not. They're actually not. We're just saying that to make ourselves feel better. They are absolutely not succeeding. And now we're even seeing it with the academic studies that are coming out. They lost so much academically too. It wasn't just mental health that was impacted. Their academics were impacted as well. And for really young kids, who were still developing in terms of like that first social interaction of learning to read faces and, being able to sit during circle time, that was all impacted as well.
Yeah. And so let's back up a little bit, because you said that the primary issue that you're seeing, or a primary issue that you're seeing today, is anxiety. Can we stop and define it? Not necessarily a book definition, but to you, what does anxiety mean? Or when someone has an anxiety problem, well, what does that mean?
So when the kids are in my office telling me about their anxiety, it is the constant thoughts of what may or may not happen. Am I going to be able to go out this weekend? What if no one invites me out this weekend? Am I going to sit home all weekend? Or is everyone going to think I'm a loser all weekend? And like those spiraling thoughts that they can't get out of their head. Or it's the thoughts of, oh my God, she hates me. She looked at me weird. She didn't open my Snap. Now I'm not going to have friends. They're going to kick me out of the friend group. It's like the spiraling. Everything is a disaster. Everything is a cause for concern.
Yeah.
So there's this constant nervousness, constant like unsettled, like nothing is going well.
And would you classify anxiety as a disease, or is it a temporary state of unwellness, or something in between?
I believe it's a temporary state of unwellness because our emotions are always changing. They're not set. And that's why I tell the kids all the time, you may be really, really anxious now. You're not going to be anxious forever. You also may be really happy now. You're not going to be happy forever either. Like our emotions change constantly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's an important framework, because a lot of people have this kind of idealistic concept that they can escape anxiety and never feel it and never, have those runaway train thoughts that start to get away from them. But that's not really reality, is it?
No, not at all.
The healthiest people in life just learn how to deal with it. Mm-hmm. It's part of the human experience to have those runaway trains get going, and those what ifs and those worst case scenarios. Now, obviously, when we develop patterns of better managing our self and our mind and our emotions, we get better at putting a stop to those when they get going. And I think that's such an important conversation to have, because I really think people out there feel like they can escape anxiety, and anything short of that, 100% escaping, is like a failure, and it is like a, something's wrong with me. And it's disempowering to think that we can ever escape having anxiety. Like, it's just a part of the human reality, isn't it?
It really is. And it's there actually for like a survival purpose. Like our flight or fight is there for survival. Like it just kind of goes haywire sometimes. So what I always say to everybody, the goal is not to get rid of anxiety. You're going to fail. You will always feel anxious here and there. And, that's just normal. But it's being able to hold on to those feelings, to have a feeling of anxiety, but continue and do what you were about to do anyway. So yeah, I'm really anxious about giving this talk in class, but I'm going to give it anyway. Instead of, running to the guidance counselor and being like, my anxiety is too bad, you need to excuse me from it, which is actually only making anxiety worse the more we avoid it.
Absolutely.
So it's about being able to hold those feelings and say, yeah, I feel anxious. Yeah, I feel depressed, but I'm going to do it anyway, because these are feelings. They don't need to control my actions.
Love it. It's changing it from a cure-all excuse to kind of a tool of empowerment, even. Mm-hmm. And when you can frame anxiety of, I have anxiety over this, well, that's obviously something I need to address. If I don't know if I'm going to be invited to the party, well, perhaps I should get better socially, or get better friends, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, work on myself to realize that, if I don't get invited to that party, well, I'll still be okay. I'll fill my weekend with other things, right? So it's almost as if anxiety is a good thing. It's kind of our beacons of what we need to work on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's about, a lot of it's about like problem solving. And we don't always need to pay such attention to our emotions. I feel like we've really shifted the pendulum a little bit too far, where the moment you have a feeling, everyone's like, tell me all about your feeling.
And
tell me where it comes from and what it means. And it's like, sometimes you could just have a feeling and be like, I feel anxious. Not really sure why, but let me continue. And that's okay. We don't always need to dive into it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The over pathologizing has one of the biggest detriments to society. And, I was someone that when I was younger was going to go into the realm of professional psychotherapy myself. And as I observed how it was implemented in the pathologizing, sit around, talk about your problems, ruminate. No, I'm not going to do that, It's certainly a cycle of creating perpetual problems and talking about them forever, Mm-hmm. Energy goes where the mind directs it. And when we direct our energy to our problems consistently and into perpetuity, well, of course, we're going to, in perpetuity, have problems.
Right. We wind up with more problems.
Yeah, absolutely. But then it's an interesting... people have such dichotomized thinking, right? It's either this or it's that. And so on the flip side, people will bury their problems and never think about it and think that, okay, no, I'll just get on with it. And then live with lifelong kind of trauma responses that are very real and very valid and very formed because of what they may have experienced, right? And for some reason, people don't understand that in the middle of both those extremes, you can address what you've experienced, not ruminate on it, figure out what it's doing to affect you in the now, and figure out how to heal that moving forward, and then be done with it.
Yeah. It's all about living in the gray area. The extremes are never helpful. It's about being in that gray area of, like you said, there's times to feel feelings and there's times to not. There's times just to be like, okay, they're there, but I'm going to continue. So it's not this all or nothing. It's really more so in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've defined anxiety. And then for this next one, I'll give the preface that I understand that you have a professional license that you have to protect. So, your response will be whatever it is. But ADHD,
Mm.
what the hell is that? What are these letters that people seem to be slapping on everyone? And now it's apparently a brand, an identity, and like a selling point. Like, look at me. Look at my ADHD Instagram page. Join my ADHD community. How did it go from some like thing, this person has some troubles, to now it's like everyone's got it and proud of it, and let's slap it on everyone so that we can give them drugs and whatever if they don't sit still in school. Like, what is ADHD? Is it even
So,
real, or is it a bunch of letters?
well, everything's kind of a bunch of letters in one respect or another. So I'm going to answer this question not just in terms of ADHD, actually, but in terms of any diagnosis, which is, and this is what I say to kids in my office all the time, you can come in and tell me all of your symptoms, and I can sit here and check a bunch of boxes. And if you get 5 out of 6, we will diagnose you as that. If you get 7 out of 8, you could be diagnosed as that. But tell me how that's going to be helpful. Is it really that we need to sit there and name everything? Or do you just need to tell me what you're actually struggling with, and let's see if we could problem solve it? Yeah. The reality is we're all very unique individual human beings. So we all have very different personalities. We all have very different, traits and tendencies. Some people sit still. Some people don't sit still. Some people feel, a lot of anxiety. Some people not as much. Like, we're all just very different beings. Some people, like Mexican food. Some people like Chinese food. Like, everyone's different. Yeah. It's what is causing you distress. Can we figure it out and fix it? I don't really care what it's called, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm not one for labels. I don't care what we name it. Tell me what the problem is, how you're experiencing it. Let's try to figure out how to fix it.
Love it.
Because some people, by the way, are super, super hyper, and that doesn't bother them. They've been able to channel it into something that works for them. So it's not a problem for them. Somebody else who may be really hyper, it may be a challenge for them, depending on what they need to be doing. So let's figure that out. But not everyone's negatives are everyone else's negatives. Like, some people, what they struggle with could be for other people what they succeed with.
Yeah.
So I think we get into a lot of problems when we start naming off, symptoms and saying that they're bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just against these labels in general. I think they're damaging to our comprehension of mental health and wellness and just existence as a whole. And it's on all sides, right? You have the people that say, well, I'm ADHD, so I can't do this. But honestly, sometimes even more disgusting than that to me is I've seen grown men walking around saying ADHD is my superpower, and so I do this and this. Bro, you can't just say you're energetic. Like, what?
Right. Yeah. I think that people kind of try to grip to some type of identity.
Yeah.
And, just, you could have identity about so many different things in your life. It doesn't always need to be something that, doesn't work for you. It could be positive as well. But really, I think that, again, it's not so much about what the label is as much as how does that impact you on a daily basis?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I certainly enjoy your approach to that side of things. Now I'm interested. Have you worked with children that have been homeschooled or private schooled versus public schooled? And have you noticed perhaps patterns and trends or kind of differences in the kind of things that they face?
I have, and I can't say that they seem to be really any different challenges than what everybody else is facing, to be perfectly honest. They still have a group of friends and social lives and academics. So it's just little different environments. But also, if you take 2 different high schools and compare the problems that kids are having, they could be very different based upon which 2 different public high schools they're going to as well.
Yeah, definitely. And how about within boys and within girls? Is there different troubles that they're facing? And is there different ways that you work with them that kind of help them along?
I think that they are actually experiencing a lot of the same issues, but it's being expressed very differently.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes
Yeah, so I think they're all dealing with anxiety. It's, how are they expressing it, which comes across a little bit different. Um, and again, for the boys, sometimes it's just harder for them to talk about it. So you kind of see it a little bit more. Those a lot of the boys with anxiety are the ones who all of a sudden, have just dove into the gaming world as an escape.
yeah.
And that's like their controlled world. That seems to be a kind of a big trend with the boys, not so much with the girls. So that's one of the big differences between the genders a lot of the times. But that's not to say that's across the board, but that tends to be one of the bigger differences. So, but again, with the standard anxiety, it's that self-talk. It's how much attention do you want to pay to your thoughts? It's how not to go down that rabbit hole. They're both experiencing it. And when we talk about, so many, it's, known very well that girls lots of times have a lot of body image issues. Boys do too. And more so now than ever before. And again, a lot of that's because of the Instagram posts and everything being on social media. A lot more boys are now having a lot of body image issues.
Do girls have their equivalent of the video games? That's kind of like a very prevalent coping or escapism mechanism for them, would you say?
I don't know if it's something as easy to identify as like a video game, but I think that they are definitely more so just hiding out at home. And for some of them, it's actually like overstudying, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like they can't leave on the weekends because they have to study. And I'm
Yeah.
like, you can't possibly be studying for like 72 hours. Like, let's talk about what's really happening.
Yeah.
So some of these really high achieving girls, especially, are a little bit hiding away in their books, to be perfectly honest, which looks like they're doing great, but they're not doing great. They're just avoiding.
Yep. Very interesting. Yeah. It's like they have pent up energy and then just find somewhere to put it. And then it kind of gets overlooked because on the surface, to someone that doesn't realize what's going on behind the scenes, it appears like a positive outlet. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And so they're both kind of experiencing anxiety. Both girls and boys are expressing it perhaps in different ways. But in your work to kind of have them heal and have them work through their issues, does that procedure look the same? Like, do you use the same language? Do you use
Yeah.
the same kind of tools?
I
Or
do. I do. I really do use the same language and the same types of tools because, again, it's about explaining. The first place where I always start with anxiety is explaining why it's happening to you physically, about the nervous system, about your fight or flight response, because I truly believe that once they kind of understand those connections, it's like, oh, okay, I'm not really having like a heart attack or dying here. It's my brain is doing this, and this is the result, and it's from a place of survival. It just doesn't realize that this actually isn't a threat. It's just starting to identify everything as a threat. So I think first that just the education behind anxiety is really important. And then the tools on how to handle it, to cope with it, to be able to have those anxious feelings, but to push yourself to do stuff anyway is really important and very universal.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And behind the scenes of every teen is hopefully some sort of parent or two parents or guardians or what have you. Do you do any work with the parents or guardians of the teens to kind of get a feeling of what's going on in their heads or what kind of environment they're creating and what's kind of
Absolutely. Absolutely. These kids don't live in a vacuum. So I do a lot of work with the parents. I actually have a whole separate part of my practice that's just parent strategy sessions. And a lot of those parents don't even have kids who come to see me for therapy. It's just parenting is hard. So it's like, what's working, what's not working. Let's give you an individualized roadmap to get your family back on track and to where it needs to be. Because sometimes in our busy lives, like we just keep going and repeating the same pattern over and over and over again. And you need somebody to put the brakes on and say, wait, hold on, back up. Let's actually look at what's happening in this family and what could be improved upon. Parents are trying, it's hard and no one is perfect. We're all humans. I have 4 kids of my own. But it's important to be able to really identify like, okay, what can we improve and how do we do this and what does it look like? So again, it's not so much like family therapy that I do in that particular program. It's really just parents will sit down with me and say, okay, this is our family dynamic. This is what's working. This is what's not working. And we sit down for like 2 hours and just do an entire plan.
Wow. And have you ever seen an instance where, say, a child has some major things that they're facing, major dysfunctions in their mental patterns, etc., and their parent wasn't also kind of dysfunctional, like behind the scenes, like is it simply a reflection of the parent's own mental state?
No, not always. I mean, I definitely have those kids who are anxious because their parents are anxious, or those kids who put pressure on themselves because the parents put pressure on them. But I also have a lot of parents who are, not anxious and fully functional. And they're, in my office going like, we don't know what happened here. And it's like, well, yeah, because your kid just doesn't live at home either. They live out in the world and other stuff influences them as well. They have stuff going on with peers and at school and society's pressures as well. So yeah, many times parents I work with are fantastic, wonderful, fully functioning, ready to help, and their kids really suffering.
This episode is brought to you by beatcancer.org. Since 1977, beatcancer.org, otherwise known as the Center for Advancement in Cancer Education, has been leading the way in holistic cancer education, offering a variety of programs as a nonprofit organization to educate the world on how to prevent or beat cancer holistically. There's far too much suffering out there from cancer, but it doesn't have to be this way. BeatCancer.org offers a variety of educational programs, many of which are absolutely free. So be sure to check out beatcancer.org, whether you'd like to attend one of our free weekly calls and get some free education that way, connect with Beat Cancer on social media, or if you're interested in becoming a certified holistic cancer coach, beatcancer.org has an educational program for you. Interesting. Interesting. And so switching gears off of there, it's an interesting topic and one that is getting more and more confusing as time goes on. Technology, like we've mentioned already, the constant hyper stimulation, the ever present 24/7 access to all sorts of things, good, bad, and ugly on the internet. There's the question of when should a child be exposed to all of it via having a cell phone, getting internet access, etc. And the answer that most parents are coming up with, or maybe the non-answer, just the kind of giving in to pressures, is like earlier and earlier. Do you have your own kind of thoughts on when and how is a healthy implementation of technology and the internet for children?
What I always say is as late as humanly possible to where their social life isn't destroyed. At some point, kids do need technology to talk to friends. Kids do need, unfortunately, at some point in their life, Snapchat, because that's how plans are made. The kids don't text anymore. They all snap. So at some point, your kid will be left out of all social situations if they don't have this technology to be part of the plans. Unfortunately, that is just a truth at this point. But I say wait as long as humanly possible before giving into any of this stuff, before giving into a phone. And then after the phone, one of the social media, whatever their friends are using, don't give it all to them right away. But then, you also have to live in reality where by the time they're like late into high school, they're about to go off to college. How much monitoring with the social media at that point can you really do realistically? It gets much harder. I hate technology. My kids were always the last ones in their grades to get cell phones. always. And it was always to the point where like, okay, finally, like all their friends are out of my kids at home because nobody was able to contact them. So now we have to get them a phone, but they were always the last ones. What I do stress with parents, especially parents of younger kids, the iPads they gotta go. When I sit at dinner with my kids, when we're out to restaurants and we look around and there are just toddlers on
Yeah.
iPads, that is not okay.
Yeah.
There's really no need for that at all. Your kids are not gaining education from an iPad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just it's lazy and it's cope and it's excuse and it's a reason to, not be inconvenienced by this beautiful blessing that you've been blessed with that is a child, right? And that's part of the fundamental framework conversation of how people view their children as a whole. I think
Mm-hmm.
far too many people just view their offspring, their sons and their daughters, as these like inconveniences. And they'll do whatever they can just to like have them F off and go in the corner and like not hear from them so they can try to resume their everyday life as if they didn't have children. And that's a large part of where the iPads come in
Mm-hmm.
because it is just like the mind pacifier, the mind number, you
Right.
know?
It's easy. Listen, it's hard to parent.
But it's supposed to be.
It's supposed to be. It is not easy. And it
Yeah.
doesn't get easy. Like it's always a different challenge.
Yeah.
But when you're out to dinner when they're little, it's supposed to be you're engaged in conversation with them, or they have their crayons and they're coloring and they're being creative. Like that's what is supposed to be happening. They're not supposed to be just zoning out on the iPad. The iPads are becoming so dangerous. And unfortunately, just more and more kids have them constantly. Like I'm in, ShopRite and I'm watching kids in grocery carts with iPads.
Yeah. Like
Like,
look around, kid. There's a whole world going on around you.
right. That doesn't need to happen. So I think that's one thing that parents really can control are the iPads when they're young. There's just no need for them. But again, when they get older in terms of phones and social media, you have to start weighing out like when is your child being left out socially because they can't talk to their friends. And that's always a problem.
And so, how do we navigate the kind of concept of if we are keeping technology away from our children, the bit of hypocritical appearance or the do as I say, not as I do that ends up kind of being observed by the child if that parent is using technology in their everyday life very frequently, even if it's for productive uses,
Yeah.
work, study, network, this,
It's
that, the other.
really, really important. And that's a great question. I tell parents all the time, your kids are watching you. So if you're sitting in your living room with nothing to do and you're playing on your phone, that's what they're learning. If you have downtime, sit in your living room and pick up a book, like do something that you want your kids to be doing. And parents, especially, at the dinner table, put away your phones. No electronics should be at the dinner table ever. Family dinner is so crucial to development. Family dinner, studies show it helps increase grades. It helps decrease drug use. Like family dinner is crucial. But that means that you actually have to be looking at each other. I don't care if the kid's really talking or not, but you have to be there and like physically engage. People can't just be on their phones like that. I don't care what it's for. Put the phones away at dinner. No electronics should be at dinner.
Yeah. Yeah. This overall separation theme of the family unit is, of course, at great detriment that we are now seeing today. The mothers were removed from the household and the children were sent off to school mandatory, and all of these things have been separating the family unit from being together. And then obviously there's the societal and the cultural changes and the shifts and then the screens. It's, all of it has the common theme of there was once, father, mother, kid, however many, dog, cat, fish, whatever. Now it's, this one over there, that one over there, this one over there, that one over there. And how can any of those individuals be expected to navigate this crazy world effectively? We're supposed to have a team. We're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to have a community. And we're supposed to have a household, a family unit. kind of like a, what do you want to be, Rambo by yourself in this world? No, you're supposed to have at least that to count on.
Right.
If we don't
Absolutely.
feel like we have that, of
It
course.
really has been lost. It's, been more and more lost from the times of, sitting, there was one TV in the house and people were all sit around the living room and watch TV together.
At least,
Now
yeah,
it's
that
everyone's
brought
just
them
in their
together.
bedrooms, and that was really the case during COVID. I mean, everybody was just in their own separate place on a device.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so it is really important to have family dinners, to do things together as a family. And the younger you start it, the easier it is to implement.
Now, what about the flip side of this, right? Because it's easy to demonize technology,
Mhm.
but technology is allowing us to have this wonderful conversation right now. It's
Yes, it
allowing
is.
us to spread it far and wide to people young and old alike that'll be able to consume this information. So let's not leave out the part of the conversation that technology does have its absolute beautiful elements and its absolute use cases for positivity and for growth and for development. And so I've seen people kind of give the alternative to the what's pitched as the healthy route of, keep your children off of technology, and kind of given the opposite of teach your kids actively as early as possible how to functionally use technology. Oh no. Did I freeze here?
Here you
Did it?
are. Mhm.
Okay. It froze for a second, right?
Mhm.
What's the last thing that you heard?
Um, Actively deal with technology.
Cool. No, let's just pick up then. So yeah, it's there's the flip side of teaching people of how to actively or teaching children how to actively and functionally use technology. And so I've seen people say, I'm going to get my kid on a computer ASAP, learning all these awesome things that they could do in a productive manner. Now, what do you say to those kind of philosophy parents?
Again, it's about not extreme and being in the gray area, you know? So kids are already on screens, by the way, when they're at school. All the schools are using them. They're learning, PowerPoints and, slides and how to research with technology. Like they're already doing all of that type of stuff at school. So again, it's about what does that really look like? And is it developmentally appropriate? And how much time are they spending on it? So it's not an all or nothing. It could be a gray, but you need to use that gray developmentally as appropriately.
Yeah, definitely. It's a strange thing. I don't know if there is a correct answer, right? And it's going to be
Right.
so.
There's no definite, like, this is the answer. It's different for every kid. It's different for every age group. It's different for where they all are socially. There's some sixth graders who are all have phones and all have Snapchat, and that's how they talk. And then in another school, none of the sixth graders have phones yet. Like it has to be, there's so many individual issues that go into these answers.
Definitely. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about another very pressing and very increasingly prevalent matter in regards to teens. And that's teens and dating.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's such a huge part of the adolescent experience, at least for a
Absolutely.
lot of people, interacting with the other sex,
Mm-hmm.
interacting, in different ways. We'll keep it as, respectful as proper, as appropriate. But, kids are out there doing a lot of adult things, and it's a weird thing to navigate, right? What do you think? Again, is there an appropriate time for teens to start dating or kind of having those experiences?
I actually think that's one piece that hasn't changed so much over the years. Uh, I still see it pretty similar to what was happening like 25 years ago, to be very honest. Lots of times, like late in middle school, kids start talking with, people they like and start saying they're dating and whatever that means. And, in high school, especially, like there's a lot of experimenting. I don't think that's actually changed much in the years. If
Yeah.
anything, they're dating a little bit less
I've heard
because
that.
kids have so much social anxiety at this point. They won't ask people out as much. Um, but really, I don't think that's changed all that much, to be perfectly honest with you. And again, that's a really normal part of development for that age group is that this is what you do.
Yeah, I have heard that from other professionals in the area saying that, it's actually happening less and less because people are, one, not knowing how to talk to people outside of a screen, or two, having the anxiety about it, or three, not even caring because, they're just so involved in whatever else virtually.
Yeah.
Um, do you think that's detrimental to development as a whole, that adolescents aren't having these experiences in their
Yeah, because it's a really normal piece. And it's how, you learn about relationships, you learn about yourself, you learn what you want and what you don't want in relationships. So it is important to get out there and to, in real life, meet people. I think there's definitely a newer concept of a lot of just online relationships where people have never even met each other.
Yeah. Or maybe even
And
see each
that's
other's faces. They're just hiding behind an anonymous profile photo.
right. So that's always interesting. But yeah, no, I do think that, it's really developmentally quite appropriate to be having these experiences in real life and that they are necessary.
And in your work with individual adolescents, is there certain dating issues that you kind of see and kind of help them work through, or do you talk about that side of their lives?
Again, I think it's really not much has changed in the last 25 years. It's still about, is this a good relationship for you? Are your boundaries being respected? Do you enjoy them? And does this work for you? If it doesn't work for you, then how do you respectfully end it? And I think all of that is still pretty normal. I think the only difference right now that I'm really seeing in the dating world is that a problem that we didn't have 25 years ago is now there's a lot of, naked pictures being sent back and forth between people who are dating. And that's always interesting, especially when they break up with the other person and what's going to happen to those photos. So we always talk about, internet safety and, putting stuff out there is really out there forever. And you don't really know who's ever going to see it. So that's been, something that's newer that's happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in your book, you have 10 foundations that every teen should know. And I guess this kind of ties into just daily overall themes of mental health practices. Would you like to share kind of some of those foundations? Obviously, you don't have to give too much away. It's in the book,
Yeah.
but like, what are some of those foundational recommendations for daily implementation?
So I have 10 and five are more physical, actually, and five are more like mental health oriented. So when I talk about the five, I talk about the five more mental health ones. I talk about, learning to be able to say no, which also goes into, boundaries. Like you're able to not take on everything. You're able to not take on all your friends' problems. Like we have to teach our kids boundaries. Because so many of the times they're actually anxious, not because of what's happening with them, but what's happening with friends, because they just take it all in. So you could be a good friend, but still say no. So I talk a lot about saying no. And one of my more controversial topics is that they're not responsible for anyone else's feelings. And we need to start really teaching them that. You could be a kind, good person, but at the end of the day, you are not responsible for how somebody else feels. Because that has put a tremendous amount of pressure on these kids.
Who does that extrapolate out to? Does that include their parents? Does that include,
Yeah. Yeah. You are not like, again, you conduct yourself in your best manner, how it feels good for you, but you can't control how other people take that in. I always give the example of this. I say, if you're driving your car and you cut somebody off by accident, that person may be like, oh, whatever, and like wave you by. Or you could be driving and by accident cut somebody off, and that person could be on the horn, giving you the finger, screaming out left and right. You did the same thing. Two people decided to react two different ways. You can't be responsible how somebody's going to choose to react.
Yeah. But I will give the caveat, because there's always the people that just take a concept like that and run way too far with it. There's the people that have this gross overemphasis of, well, this is just how I am. I am just me. It doesn't matter what the world reacts to, right? There's still the caveat of let's conduct ourselves in a proper and professional and appropriate and
Absolutely.
respectful way
Mhm.
to, and then in that way, we'll probably tip the scales that will be reacted to in a positive way.
Right.
But then if we're not, we
Mhm.
understand it's not our fault, right? Because there's
Yep.
people that get so worked up in that kind of false light and love mindset of, just take me as I am. It doesn't matter that I cut you off and then I cut this person off and well, at what point is it you? Like, and you are
Right.
being kind of shitty,
Right. And
Like,
that goes back to like, you have to be able to conduct yourself in a good manner.
yeah,
But at the end of the day, you can't be responsible for everyone else's feelings.
yeah,
So, I talk about that. I talk about building up confidence in themselves, about being able to deal with disappointment, and also taking on responsibility for themselves and for their actions and behavior. And then the 5 physical ones are, water, sleep, exercise, food, and meditation. And sleep is my absolute favorite. It is such a favorite of mine that I actually became a certified sleep science coach. And I'm opening up an entire new business, Sleep Solutions by Keri, for adults to help them sleep. Because if you are not sleeping well, nothing else in your life is going to work.
yep, yep. And what does sleeping well mean? Is it just bam, 8 hours, or is
It's
there
like you're 7 to 8 hours every single night consistently, and like in a good deep sleep where you're getting those REM cycles in.
more to it than just quantity though? Is there kind of other,
Quality, absolutely. Yeah, you need to be going through the stages of sleep, from the light sleep to the deep sleep to the REM.
and how do we make sure we're doing that?
That has to do with, how are you prepping your day? Are you exercising throughout the day? Are you cutting off caffeine? Are you going to bed stressed out? Are you overdoing it all day long to where you're just so fried at the end? Like, there's a lot of other factors that go into it. But if you look at, the TV or anything, you will see just ad after ad after ad for sleep medication. We are having a massive sleep problem in this country, and it directly impacts our mental health, and it directly impacts our physical health.
Yep, definitely. And on the other pillars of physical foundations, meditation. What does that look like to you?
So I tell kids that there's always very different ways to do this, but at the end of the day, what it is it's about to be able be in the present moment. You're going to have thoughts, but to be able to not attach to them and to let them go. So whether that means that you are laying down doing a guided meditation, whether that means you're outside doing a mindful walk about like, oh, what do I see? What do I hear? Whatever it is, to be in the moment. Because when we practice being in the moment, we're able to use that skill throughout the rest of our day. So when we start going, oh no, what happens if this, that, tomorrow, bring it back. Where are you right now in this present moment? In the present moment, there's not a whole lot to be anxious about. So it's about training the brain to come back to the present.
Yeah. I like to myself look at meditation as kind of an overall philosophy to approach everything in life with, right? Because I think a lot of people get tripped up on the word meditation because they think it's I have to go sit in the forest and cross my legs and close my eyes and clear my mind. And sure, I mean, I've done that. That's fun. And there's a lot of benefits that, do come from a practice like that. But to me, within the realms of everyday life, someone can exist in a state of meditation as they're taking action, as they're doing this, as they're doing that. To me, meditation is like conscious existence. It's kind of
Yeah.
with it. Like you just said, you're thinking about the present moment. You're experiencing your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings, and kind of observing the interaction of those behind the scenes elements with what's right in front of you and kind of how they're interacting in a going back and forth way. And so to me, I think a useful mental reframe is to get away from the concept that meditation is this and then I go about my day. Why not just go about your day in meditation?
Mm-hmm.
It's a super cool kind of structure
Yeah.
to think about.
I like the word that you just used. It's about observing.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Just
Yeah.
observing this moment.
It's observing this moment, it's analyzing it, it's feedback. And only through this feedback do we ever grow in life, right? How many people are just repeating the same cycles of the same feelings and the same triggers, causing the same feelings, and never breaking away from this because they're not observing, analyzing, viewing, kind of processing the feedback and then acting accordingly to make the changes to get different results. It's a definition of insanity.
Right.
People are doing the
Absolutely
same
it is.
thing. People are doing the same thing over and over again and in a perpetual state of anxiety, not realizing that all it takes to break that feeling is to break the chain and cycle of repetitive action. It's interesting how, far few people are aware that we can do so. But
Right.
like you said, people aren't taught it. And so, on the sake of teaching our teens these kinds of things and how teaching them other things that they can use to live a healthy and more fulfilled life, in your 10 Foundations for Parents
Mhm.
book, what are those kind of pillars? What are they
They're the
overlapping with
same
the tools?
exact pillars. And it's just how do you teach them? I mean, those are the 10 foundations. If we can get those 10 concepts down, we're going to be in a good spot, especially the 5 physical ones. If you can just focus on whenever someone's like, where do I start? I'm like, start with the easiest one, which is water. We walk around dehydrated constantly. Like, let's just be hydrated human beings. Like, let's start there.
Yep. And people sometimes shy away from these simple answers because they
Mhm.
conflate complexity with validity. But people would be shocked, I think, if they got their water right.
Yes. Yes. It's like the simple steps. So, really, when there's a lot of resistance, that's normally the one I'll start with. I'm like, let's just start with you drinking water, because it really does make a difference. There's actually so many studies that back it up. We need it. We desperately need it. And a lot of people are highly dehydrated at this point.
Yeah. And it's so funny when people even need studies to me to
I know.
drink water.
Yep.
You need a bunch of scientists who have done something and wrote a piece of paper to convince you to drink water?
Yeah.
What's wrong with people?
Mhm.
It's crazy, but I'll always bring people's attention to when we're talking about consuming water. It really is more than just a quantity matter in this regard. It is a quality matter as well. Not
Mhm.
all water is the same. It's not
Absolutely.
just water is water is water, right?
Mhm.
What kind of filtration system are you using? If it's just a Brita or the fridge, unfortunately, you're still drinking garbage,
Mhm.
and it doesn't have to be that complicated, but it can have some cost associated with getting clean water. But for parents or even for teens, if you work a job, you have some cash, find a way to get yourself some actually clean filtered water with a good system because our bodies are, I don't know, whatever percent they say water, it's definitely a majority. Do we not think that the quality of that input is going to affect the quality of our experience? And so it's also important to remember that we interact with water and intake water, not just in how we drink, but how we shower,
Mhm.
how we bathe. That's an easy actionable I like to give people all the time. Go on Amazon, eBay, whatever, shower filter.
Right.
Super cheap, super low cost, great way to change the way that you interact with water on a day-to-day basis. Because our skin is very porous, our skin absorbs, and tap water that's coming out of the shower is full of garbage. It's the
Mhm.
unfortunate truth, but it's the truth. Chlorine, fluoride, antibiotics, all sorts of hormones, what have you. And that's getting absorbed, especially when we take hot showers and it opens up the pores and it gets right on in. So that's an actionable I really like to leave people off with because it's super, super beneficial, not just mentally and emotionally as you're not getting all these imbalancing chemicals, but physically as well. You filter your water to shower in, you get nicer hair, nicer skin, nicer nails. So even if you don't care about your mental health, you care about your hair, do it.
Absolutely.
Do it. It's super easy. And so let's see. What would you like to talk about? What are some of these things that you are working with of these teens on? Like, what are some interesting things that you'd like to share? We have a good amount of time left.
I really think that like sleep has been so crucial in my practice right now. Um, I could always kind of tell when kids are going down, it's because their sleep is off. Every time they're in my office, I'm like, "How's your sleep this week?" And the moment they start telling me it's been a disaster, I'm like, "Oh, we're gonna go downhill. Hold on. What's happening to make it that way? What's going on?" It's really a great indicator of how they are mentally. So I think sleep is something that's very much so overlooked, and it's just a huge piece to the puzzle at this point that we need to be focused on.
And why is it so like problematic for a lot of people? Is it they're just not going to sleep and putting themselves in bed? Is it
I
they're
think
not
some of
able
it,
to
yeah,
fall
is that they're
asleep?
not prioritizing it. So they're just, doing whatever and then falling asleep at like, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. And these kids have to get up early the next day. Like it's just not enough sleep. Like they're just not prioritizing it to say, or putting up a boundary to be like, okay, I need to go to bed at this time. Everything else needs to shut down.
Now it brings in the interesting question of, are kids gravitating to what is more so their natural cycle? And then when we force them to wake up early to go to a rigid, structured school system, is that inherently throwing them off? Because, like,
So they definitely are waking up earlier than they should be waking up for their natural rhythms. And a lot of high schools, at least around here, actually have started pushing back the start times because of it, because they know kids should not be waking up that early. But even still, if they need to be waking up at 7 a.m., they need to be going to bed at like 10, 10:30. And kids are just not willing to do that at this point. They want to be on social media. They want to be scrolling through their phones. Like that's what they're doing at night. They're not making it a priority to actually put the phone away and to go to bed.
now why is that? Because perhaps I'll play devil's advocate or team's advocate here. Perhaps in this crazy, chaotic world where they go to school and it's a bunch of nonsense and they do their homework and they, hear whatever they hear from their parents. Maybe that's annoying them too. For a lot of teens and people in general, the nighttime is their only time of peace and
Mhm.
quiet and sanctity where they can kind of be in control of their reality. It's just them in their room doing whatever they want, whether it is healthy or unhealthy behaviors that they get into, that's a whole other thing. But I think a lot of people specifically stay up night, especially, young children and teens, because it's kind of the only time they have sovereignty over in their otherwise kind of out of their control life.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense that that's their time and everything else that day has been somebody else's kind of design for them. So this is their time and they want to do what they want to do. But in saying that, they still need to be able to, at some point, for their own boundaries, be like, okay, I need to go to bed now. Um, and it's not like they don't have time all day long to be on their social media and to be doing what they want to do, because I always say to them, tell me what your screen time was like. And it's unbelievable how much time they're spending on social media. I had one kid who was recently complaining to me. She was in college. She's like, I just have no time. I have no time to study. I said, pull up your social media time. How much time are you on a daily basis? The amount of time she was on a daily basis on social media, I said to her, you could have a full-time job and still go to school and you would still have leftover time. She
Yeah.
was on her phone like 10 hours a day. The amount of time on the screens has gone through the roof.
Yeah. And it's interesting how people don't even realize how much it adds up.
Right.
It's like so well designed at engulfing our whole mind that it's just kind of like a time warp and oh shit, it's
Yes.
been 2 hours, it's been 4 hours.
Right.
But I've seen some interesting features lately. I think Instagram specifically has a feature that they could turn on, or whoever could turn on, where it'll like remind you every half hour, hey, it's
Yeah.
another half hour.
Mhm.
Maybe you want to do something else.
Right. I always encourage them to like set like a screen time. I said, even if you don't, listen to it, at least like, oh, I've been on social media for 2 hours today.
Yeah.
Because they are, as you said, really well designed to just suck people in. And then all of a sudden, you're scrolling for 5 hours and it's like, where did my day go?
Yeah. Let's play a bit of a blame game here.
Mm-hmm.
Whose fault is it that our children are suffering so much? Is it parents? Is it the kids themselves? Is it society at large? Is it the social media companies? Is it capitalism? Well, like who did this?
It's a good question. I think there's a lot of different answers in that. I think that social media definitely has a part in this. Electronics definitely have a part in this. Parents have a part in it. The kids have a part in it. The schools have a part in it. Everyone has a part in it. There's been a lot more pressure added to these kids in the last few years. And there's been a lot less time for just normal kid interaction. Like, even when these kids are growing up now, there's very few just like ride your bike around town with your friends and figure out your problem. It's all like organized sports. Like, there's always an adult present. So I think we've gotten away from really allowing these kids to build up their own confidence and problem solving skills because adults have just constantly stepped in. And listen, like, well-meaning adults have stepped in, but we need to back out and be like, they can figure it out on their own. Like, kids should be playing outside and dealing with conflict amongst themselves. That's how you develop problem solving skills.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you said that because in allowing for development or trying to trying to make development happen, it doesn't allow for development, right? Like you said, when you try to solve problems,
Right.
you don't allow them to learn how to solve problems. So, like, there is the modeling of behavior that a
Mm-hmm.
parent can do in solving their own problems, and then, when appropriate, kind of lend a hand. But this over fixation of, "Ooh, I have to do this for them. I have to do this for them." It's such a crutch, If
Yes.
you give a child crutches when from the time they're an infant, and their legs will never get strong enough to walk.
Right.
And here we are in this society that is just kind of over padded and over crutched children in every sort of way, and then are surprised when they don't know how to do anything.
Exactly.
Of course, they don't know how to order food at a restaurant.
No.
They were
Yep.
on their iPad as you were doing it. They were on their iPad and all these things as you were demonstrating how to be a functioning member of society. And
And
then
that's,
you ordered
yeah,
the
that's
for them.
That's why there's so many issues at college right now. These kids can't function because they don't know how.
Yeah. And you see the generation, it's always insane to me when you see a generation like talk shit on the generation after them as if they didn't create that.
Right.
Where's the disconnect there? How did kids these days are this? You mean your kids?
Mhm.
What? You did this, and I'll always give responsibility back to the parents more so than most, even because you are responsible for guiding and shaping your child's experience in this world. That is your job as a parent. And so whether you're not, for some reason, you send your children to public school or any school, which I am wholeheartedly against for my own operations, that's still your responsibility. Even, you can't just wave your hands and say, well, I sent them away and they got effed up.
Right.
So, well, you did that. It's your responsibility when they get home to make sure that they're not giving in to the pressures or, giving in to the programming or being shaped in all these negative ways that if you just leave your children to the wolves of the world, they'll be shaped into experiencing. It's so crazy to me how parents have just thrown their hands up to a large extent and think that it's not 100% their fault for what their children are experiencing. I don't care what social media is out there. I don't care what internet's out there. You as a parent are responsible for what your child lives and experiences and how they handle it. You're responsible for equipping them with the mental procedures and values and comprehension and feeling of having a cohesive family unit they could turn to if they need it in order to face the world. That's the whole point of a parent. And that seems to be lost. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's become quite a mess. So hopefully parents can really get back to the foundations and build their kids back up again.
Yeah. And I think the biggest kicker in that is how can a parent build their kids back up again if a lot of parents out there don't even have themselves put together?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're seeing. We have a generational cycle of young boy, young woman, lost in the world, never quite getting themselves together, just kind of stumbling through life, trying to make it, not knowing how, but just getting on with it. Then meeting someone who also doesn't have themselves together. And they both just kind of stumble around life, not really ever figuring it out. And then they have a kid. So, like, obviously, that kid is not going to be in a household that can teach them how to navigate life in a healthy mental health capacity if their parents don't even know what the hell's going on, you know? And so we have this cycle going on of people having children who are still kind of children themselves and
Mm-hmm.
unhealed children in themselves. And, I feel for the children of those unhealed children that then are faced with either completely crumbling or doing that hard work of breaking those generational cycles of confusion and suffering and perhaps very unhealthy behaviors. But thanks to the tools of the internet, I think we're seeing a lot of that. I think we're seeing a lot of very interesting youth come up and come together. And people of all ages now more than ever, I think, are on healing journeys of their own through being able to experience podcasts like this or
Yes.
good posts on social media. And I think we have beautiful times ahead of us.
I do too. Absolutely.
I really do think we're going in a positive direction. And so I absolutely thank people like yourself and other professionals that have this healthy approach to healing and mental health and all the different health capacities because you're game changers in allowing that shift to take place quicker and most effectively, right? And so how is it that people can kind of find you? Are you on socials? Do you have your websites? What can they see
Yeah.
there, find there? Are
So
you working with?
go
Good.
ahead.
I was saying, are you working with people strictly in person in your private practice, or do you accept clients and have programs online? What is working with Keri Cooper kind of feel like?
Sure. So my website is Keri Cooper Holistic Therapy. And I work with people in person and online, depending on what state they're in because of licensure regulations. But I also have a parent seminar program as well, where I work directly with parents for the roadmap to like success of how to get their families back. My books are on Amazon: Mental Health Uncensored, 10 Foundations Every Parent Needs to Know, and Mental Health Uncensored, 10 Foundations Every Teen Needs to Know, which is a workbook for the teens. And then my new website is coming, which is Sleep Solutions by Keri. So that's very exciting. And I am also on Instagram at Keri Cooper Holistic Therapy as well.
Awesome. Awesome. It's awesome when you have so many different avenues for people to explore because for some reason some people like Instagram but won't go to a website and all
Right.
and so for people that might be interested in working with you, I would love to know why is it and how is it that they might relate to you? In that at the beginning you said you want to be the person that you needed when you were younger. And so would you like to share with the audience kind of what did you need when you were younger? And what kind of struggles did you face that you want to really be there for? for people?
Yeah, I think that so much of it is I really wanted to teach people to empower themselves, that you can control how you feel every day, that you're not just a victim to those feelings. And, I never ate well, exercised, was hydrated when I was younger, and really had no idea that that played any type of role in how I felt. And it wasn't until, my journey later on that I realized how important it is. And now, I don't know what I would do without those healthy habits. They really keep me so structured and feeling well. So I think, for a lot of people, it's that empowerment and it's those problem solving skills and it's understanding those daily habits, how they impact the rest of our lives.
Yeah, it's so funny when the basics are so powerful that they get overlooked, right? So you're not here claiming to have some magical secret bottle potion formula that can help people.
Nope.
It's just, hey, I know how to implement these very simple tenets of life itself, and I'll help you through that and watch what happens. It's a beautiful thing, right? Because there's a lot of people trying to push the latest thing and the latest that, or this diet or this, secret meditation practice. But Keri's over here saying, hey, you don't need all that. Let's just
Nope.
live. Let's just live
Let's
right.
go back to the foundations.
Awesome. And so, Keri, amongst all these wonderful messages that we've already kind of covered today, is there any one final message that you'd really like for our viewers and listeners to take home?
That it's your daily habits that are going to dictate how you feel throughout your life. So go back to the foundations.
Yeah. Massive changes happen one step at a time. And every moment of every day, you have a choice which direction you take that step. You can go towards the change you want to see, stay in the same place, or you could go farther into a downward spiral of unhealthiness. So the choice is yours. Empowerment is the key. Keri, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
A big thank you goes out again to Keri for coming on the show. I very much enjoy her approach to mental health, and I appreciate that she's out there working with a very vulnerable population, such as the adolescent youth. The world is always been a crazy place for a teenager. It's always been a crazy time in life and development and puberty and such. But in this digital age, things are getting crazier. They're getting faster. You're exposed to more craziness, and it's inescapable to a large degree. And the stuff that's going on in public schools, Jesus Christ, it's certainly no surprise that so many of the youth are struggling so much, and obviously going through the insanity that was the world getting locked down over absolutely nothing other than a big joke was, something that most adults had a difficult time processing, let alone if you're going through those developmental stages or you're a child going through those times that's now an adolescent that lost out in all that development. Phones in your face, tablets, TVs, it's I feel for the youth of today, certainly. So I really appreciate her focus of even just highlighting the basics for these teenagers, and getting their bodies right as much as she's getting their minds right. It's amazing how much anxiety and problems might at least be lessened if you just drink some water. And it's simultaneously sad that it's something that needs to be said so much, but I'm glad that there's someone saying it. So it was a pleasure to have her on the show. Great conversationalist, and I have no doubt that she's doing great work in her office. So check out her links. They'll be in the description wherever you're watching this. I love the support. Be sure you're subscribed wherever you're watching. This way you get notified whenever I put out a new episode. Plenty more coming your way. Make sure you're connected on social media platforms, whichever your favorite are. I'm on all of them. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook as Zach the Health King. On Twitter as Health King Zach. Again, that's Z-A-K. No extra letters in the spelling of Zach needed. My social media team has some awesome clips going out. Great way to brighten your day with a bit of information and entertainment, all the same as you're in between listening to podcast episodes. You can find links to all those channels and more at ZakTheHealthKing.com. It's ZAK, thehealthking.com. You're listening to the Health King's Court. Ancient wisdom, modern health.